So I'm Katie Rice. I'm your county supervisor. I'm also the county supervisor representing all of San Anselmo, Fairfax, depending on Ross, Larkspur, Greenbrae, and Kentfield. I am also a resident, 20-year resident of Sleepy Hollow, and I was actually raised in Mill Valley. So this county is very much my county, my native county, and this community is very much my community. My 3 kids all went through the Ross Valley School District system, and they went to White Hill School here and on to Drake. And now I have one back in college and one new to college and one who's going to turn 29 on Saturday. Pretty big deal. Anyway, so the point being, this is all of our community, whether you live in Fairfax or all the way down in Larkspur, and certainly it's my community too. And as I speak to you here today, and in any of the realms I'm speaking to people, constituents, I try to keep in mind everybody and listen hard to everybody, and remember there's also people who aren't in the room who I represent. So that's a good, I think we're getting there. We're almost seated. More chairs are coming. So I want to welcome everyone who came tonight for this meeting, and I'll get a little bit more into what we're going to be doing here tonight in a minute. It's a fairly clean format. We're leaving the bulk of the time of this meeting, and I'd like to try to wrap up by 8:30, though I'm happy to stay longer as our staff to answer any questions that don't get answered during Q&A. But so we'll have a presentation by one of the Stetson engineers who's worked on this program, as well as our program manager. And the presentation is going to be partly a broad overview of the larger program, the problem that we're trying to solve, and then a focus down on Lefty Gomez and the detention basin system as proposed or conceived, and status as to where we are with Lefty. And then, but it's pretty broad, and this is not going to be a long presentation, and so we won't probably hit in the presentation onto every question and curiosity you may have about either Lefty or the program. Hence, we have a lot of time for Q&A, and during that time, want to get questions, want to hear your concerns, and want to get input both on process and on maybe a little hindsight, but more about foresight on how, as we look at either Lefty or any other part of the Ross Valley program, we can do a better job, I can do a better job engaging the community so that we can make sure that whatever we move forward with is something that the community has been involved in and the community is behind. We can't, I have no notions about trying to move forward a project, any kind of project, whether it's flood control or anything, that the community isn't behind. Big lesson learned in Memorial Park. 1, we need to do a much better community process on the front end. And 2, as if we all didn't know this anyway, we're not going to, no project can be implemented in a community without support. We may not get 100% support for a program or a project, but certainly there needs to be some consensus around the community wanting to move forward with something. Otherwise, it's doomed for failure. So I put that out there right now to assure everyone that there's no done deal here with Lefty Gomez. It's a proposal. We're in a pause phase because the feasibility, as you'll hear, the technical feasibility part has been done. Now we need to go out to the community and and learn about it, talk to the stakeholders, bring the stakeholders in, and that's everybody from neighbors to the school district to the town of Fairfax, and people live in Fairfax, and it even involves people further downstream. We need to see where we're at, what the community wants to do, what are the options with Lefty, and then make a decision if we want to go forward with the full CEQA environmental process. It doesn't make sense to me to invest in something if it doesn't have community support. So, and then we'll wrap up right around 8:30 and try to bring some sort of closure to what we learned and what we heard tonight. But let me just say now, this is this is not the first and last meeting that we'll be discussing either this program or specifically Lefty Gomez. I anticipate a public process and a community process that's going to involve sort of big formal meetings like this, but maybe site meetings, stakeholder meetings, and that's also what I want to hear about when we get to the Q&A and comments and input. So with that, couple housekeeping things. We are taping, this meeting is being taped, and it will be available to view on the website when it gets packaged and sent over, however that happens. There's comment cards in the back if you want to leave a question or a comment and don't feel like speaking when that time comes, or if you have to leave, just leave fill out a comment card. Bathrooms are out these doors, I think here and to the right. Am I right? Okay, so that's good. And I think that is all the housekeeping. So I'm going to hand it over to James Riley, James, you're going to stand up? All right, and James will introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I am James Riley with Stetson Engineers. I'm a resident of Fairfax, too, for 20 years. And my daughter, Grace, goes to this fine school. Our firm's involvement in Ross Valley flooding, there's a long history there. We were first engaged back in the 80s by the town of Ross to do an investigation of the efficacy of the Army Corps' proposal to complete its federal flood control project in Ross and Kentfield. More recently, Stetson Engineers was hired by the county to lead a team of several other local firms to come up with a plan to reduce the flood hazard risk in Ross Valley. That plan, named the Ross Valley Flood Program Capital Improvement Plan, or CIP, as it's also referred to, was completed in 2011. Better get my glasses. Okay. Through this work and through our experience living in Ross Valley and observing flooding firsthand, we've developed an understanding of the flooding problems and ways to reduce the flood hazard. So that's what I'm going to talk about in the next 5 or 10 minutes, ending with the role of detention basins in general and what makes Lefty Gomez so important to the program. Flooding impacts our community. 3 large floods have hit the valley since the 1950s, with the 2005 flood affecting over 1,100 properties valley-wide and causing upwards of $100 million in flood damage. The 2005 flood was approximately a 1% annual chance flood event, and that's also referred to commonly as a 100-year event because over the long term, a flood of that magnitude should be expected to happen once every 100 years. But we know probability doesn't always happen. So why do we flood? It's a combination of several reasons: location, geology, shallow, tight, fine-grained soils with limited absorption capacity, and development that has encroached onto the banks of the creek. But the biggest reason is the prolonged, intense rainfall that can happen as a result of Pacific storms. Here's a graph of the water level in Corte Madera Creek at Ross during the month of December 2005, and also the precipitation. So on this graph, we have in blue the accumulative precipitation. So when you see an abrupt increase in these lines, that means we had a heavy storm. And the steeper and higher it goes, it means it was a real big storm. In the red, we have the response of the creek in terms of water level in the creek. So by the time the deluge hit on New Year's Eve, 6 storms had already hit earlier that month, and the watershed was saturated. There's no place for the water to go but to pour out of the creek and into the developed floodplain. So again, here are the 6 storms: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we got walloped by this big one on New Year's Eve, 9 inches in about 24 hours. So when you get hit with a storm like that, after all being preceded by all these storms, you're going to flood. In formulating the plan, we took a watershed approach, and that means designing measures to eliminate flooding at all locations along the creek, understanding that we're dealing with a hydraulically interconnected system, and we need to account for the effect that a measure at one location can have on another location. Our first step, let me just explain this map. This is a map of the watershed. This is a map of the watershed. Where am I? Okay. And this is the watershed boundary. And here we have Fairfax Creek, San Anselmo Creek, and they merge in downtown Fairfax. And San Anselmo Creek then continues downstream through San Anselmo. It's joined by Sleepy Hollow Creek. And then we get down into the Ross area where it's joined by Ross Creek. And then Corte Madera Creek flows to the bay. So our first step was to examine information collected from the 2005 flood and identify key breakout locations and critical reaches where creek flow is naturally limited by narrow or low banks or obstructed by buildings, bridges, retaining walls, or some other structure. So here you can see the breakout in Fairfax. And at these breakout points, the water escapes from the channel and then almost flows as an independent river aside from the channel and into the developed floodplain. And it's these breakouts that cause the greatest amount of property damage. We also have breakout at Sleepy Hollow Creek, and then of course the breakout at San Anselmo, where it flows down San Anselmo Avenue. And then we have a breakout in Ross, where it flows down through Ross Commons and through Poplar and all the way down into Kentfield. So those were the focus of our efforts to prevent flooding. And it's in these critical reaches, we call them, where we focus our efforts at increasing the capacity of the channel. Using a hydraulic model to simulate the response of the creek to hypothetical measures, in other words, what ifs, what if we did this, what if we did that, we attempted to remove the limitations and obstructions and increase the creek carrying capacity to its practical maximum. Now, practical maximum is a very important term. It means the maximum enlargement of the creek and its carrying capacity without severely impacting creekside private properties, without the need for high flood walls, and within the limits of environmental regulatory acceptability. In other words, we pushed the envelope. We tried to make the creek carry as much water as we could, practically speaking. We then used the model to test whether or not these in-channel measures to increase capacity would provide enough added capacity to contain the flood. We found that the measures could not contain the flood without building high flood walls. The exception was Sleepy Hollow, where we found that we could contain the flood through bridge replacements and low flood walls along some reaches. So that's what this slide shows, is flood walls would be necessary, very high flood walls would be necessary in Fairfax and in San Anselmo. Sleepy Hollow, we could contain it if we did the bridge replacements and low flood walls. So we needed to do more for Fairfax and the rest of the lower valley. With the creek enlarged as much as it could be, we needed to turn to another tool, flow reduction. Using the model, we determined the amount of flow reduction needed to contain the flood. So in Fairfax, we would need to reduce that peak flow by 450 cubic feet per second. In San Anselmo, about 710 cubic feet per second. And in Ross and Kent Field, about 1,350 cubic feet per second.
How much of a reduction is that over?
Yeah, the flows, for example here, the flow is about 6,900 cubic feet per second. Sure. So we considered two ways to reduce flow: green infrastructure and detention basins. Green infrastructure uses natural or engineered systems that mimic nature to attenuate stormwater runoff and improve stormwater quality. A couple examples are bioswales and rain gardens, but permeable pavement and rain barrels are also forms of green infrastructure. Green infrastructure is most effective for dealing with small storms, and it's not usually suitable for large flood events, particularly in Ross Valley, with its soils and high water table that are not favorable for rapid infiltration. That's why we did not pursue green infrastructure further. Instead, we turned to detention basins. Detention basins are widely used. They are kept empty at all times, even during the early stages of a severe storm. But when flooding is imminent, detention basins are activated to remove storm flow from the creek and store it temporarily. The water is then later released back to the creek after the storm has passed and water levels have receded. Thus, the plan employs two tools: flow capacity increases through bridge replacements and other in-channel measures, and flow reduction through detention. These two tools work together. The county also has a program of annual channel maintenance where removal of debris is carried out, and that also adds to the ability of the creek to maintain its capacity. So this map shows the layout. This map shows the layout plan for the Ross Valley flood program as it stands. It's a network of in-channel measures and detention basins that work together to reduce the flood hazard. Not all the detention basins shown here are needed to meet the flow reduction targets, but all will be considered and evaluated as the program evolves. Detention basins are also important because they allow implementation of in-channel measures to proceed. When creek capacity is increased along these reaches by replacing bridges and culverts that obstruct flow, and new bridges with larger spans, or removing or raising buildings that cross over the creek, then during a flood, less water will overtop the creek, and more water will be conveyed downstream. So this means that downstream property owners will be hit with higher flood levels. So we need detention basins to hold back some of that water and help counteract this unintended effect.
Is the Red Hill Park that was on that the one that is no longer option, it's just still on the slide?
As far as I know, it's still an option.
That's not Memorial, it's a different one.
Yeah, that's it. Memorial's not on there, but Red Hill Park is.
Okay.
Yeah. Detention basins would be kept dry always and available for recreation or other purposes, except in emergencies. This graph shows that had detention basins been in place, they would have been used for flood detention only 3 or 4 times over the past 65 years. I think probably this is somewhat anomalous. I would use something on the order of maybe once every 10 years or so. We can't predict how often they're going to be used, but it is a probability. I would say I would use one about once every 10 years as for a good rule of thumb. So what makes Lefty Gomez detention basin stand out? It's very effective. It achieves about 75% of the target flow reduction for Fairfax. It has opportunities for multiple benefits. School and recreation uses benefit through better playing fields and added utilization of the play fields because they will drain better. It offers opportunities for stormwater quality enhancement, creek habitat enhancement. It's really a way to add value to an existing public asset. It's implementable. It's publicly owned. It avoids challenges and uncertainties associated with acquiring private property. And because of its effectiveness and multiple benefits, it's grant fundable. For these reasons, it's a critical component of the overall Ross Valley flood program and an essential element to achieving meaningful flood hazard reduction in Fairfax. This ends my presentation. I'll be around for the Q&A. Neil?
If I seem a little stiff, it's because I was told I have to stand on this X so that I'm caught by all the cameras, so do the best I can here. I'm Neil Knatzer. I'm the relatively new Ross Valley Flood Protection and Watershed Program Manager. I think this is my third public meeting. It's great to see such a good turnout. Prior to coming here, I was working in Mill Valley, and we rarely, if ever, had this amount of attendance at a meeting. So it's encouraging to see such a great community participation here. What I'm trying to do is just give you a general idea of where we are with Lefty Gomez, get you to understand more about the things that we've been working on. Essentially, we've been trying to answer these three questions. So, could detention at Lefty work? And James has done, as he described, a lot of that work to establish the technical merit of that, whether or not it would work. Also, what else would need to be considered? So there are technical things that need to be considered, like the soils. So, for example, we are doing some geotechnical explorations to understand what's lying underneath the field. What's the drainage like? Is it feasible to construct there from a technical perspective? And then also, how could Lefty Gomez be improved? One of the goals of our program is to be multi-benefit. And, not just to see this as a detention basin, but we see it more as adding detention capability to Lefty Gomez Field. Multi-use, multi-benefit. So part of our homework, of course, is going out and, we're not reinventing the wheel here. This is a concept that's been used locally and, as you'll see, even internationally. There are detention in other communities, and so these are great examples to see, what it might look like in your own community. And this is Laurel Baseball Fields in Oakley, California, which is really not that far down the road. You can see, the general characteristics where you do have like an earthen berm here, and you can see also, the conditions that, the dual use that facility or field works to use as when it rains, when it's flooding. Another example, also close by in Windsor, California. This berm is actually very well masked. It's part of the approach to the field, and you can see here nice grassy slope on this berm. These are just examples of again what you can already see out there in your community. And if you want to go really far for you international travelers who have been lucky enough to go to Copenhagen, this is a huge plan for the city there, where they're taking a lot of their parks. This looks like a hockey rink, and also, both under the condition where it's being used for recreation, as well as how it might look when it's being used for detention, which it's still being some recreational. I guess it depends on what your definition of recreation is, but I like skipping stones, so we'll call that recreation. And we have taken a lot of that information we've received through James Riley's work, where he's doing the hydraulic calculations. We've taken some geotechnical work, and we've come up with these engineering plans and drawings, which really don't tell the whole picture of what the potential is for Lefty Gomez from a recreational standpoint or even from a detention standpoint. But this is a start. This is where we're putting things on paper, trying to understand the problem, trying to figure out the problem. But these are not designs. We understand that, and that's a key. You know, design is what you end up with at the end of a process, and the community needs to be part of that process. So while this might be a technical solution, in order to be an actual project, we need you. And that's exactly what Katie was saying, and I just wanted to kind of reinforce that here tonight. So, of course, after seeing all those lovely photos of other detention facilities, we thought it would be really good to at least get the conversation started, get the juices flowing in everyone's minds. You know, well, what might that look like here, given what we know at this point? So we do have some visuals. I'm sure during our Q&A, as well as your comment period, you might ask, hey, go back to that slide with the visual, and we'll be happy to do that. So I'm not going to go too much into these, but as you can see, these are the playing field configurations. You know, the existing uses would need to be, you know, we've started to try to understand those. We want to do more in meeting with the community, the recreational groups that use the field. There's a lot of details I'm sure you guys have that we would want to know if we were considering these types of uses at Lefty. But we do have the baseball fields and the basketball courts. That's what that is there. This is Sir Francis Drake, just to orient you to the site. This is a wonderful 3D rendering from Sir Francis Drake looking up at the open space hill. So you can kind of get a general idea of, you know, the overall dimensions, how it would look visually. And then if you're in the field at home plate and you're looking to make a home run, I think you'll be able to clear the berm there. You know, it's not as dramatic as you might think a detention basin being, you know, you being in a pit. It's a very large field, so this visual kind of gives an indication that, you know, you're not in a hole.
How deep is this visual, what is this, you know, how much you're digging out?
Yeah, this is to scale. It's to the scale that we size the detention basin for. I don't have those details. Like I said, I'm kind of new. I just started a couple months ago. 16.
Let's all wait for questions. These questions are going to be very
Yeah.
all of us will go through systematically so we can all hear it.
Thanks, Matt. Perfect. Thank you.
And I also wanted to add, like I said, I'm relatively new here. Russ Eberwein is the project manager. He's been working on this in very broad detail. So I just wanted to get my face out here. And I'm sorry if I don't know answered every question, but we do have the team here, and we will be able to answer your questions. And if not, if we can't answer your questions tonight, we'll definitely be getting back to you. That's what this is all about. So kind of what's next, and what is our community engagement? You know, this is why we need your help. We are here, you know, we're in this cycle here. We're trying to present you with, you know, some information, kind of give you an idea of where we are now. We're going to obtain feedback on the information that we've presented you. We're going to use that feedback, and then we're going to go back to presentation of these concepts. So this is going to go around and around until everyone is comfortable and has a really good understanding of what the effects would be, you know, what we're designing for before we would move forward. And so then the next stage, you can see this is the question mark phase. There's still all of these steps that would need to happen. There's environmental review, and that has its own pause and stop points and approvals that are necessary. Design is the same way. And then finally, before you go construction, there would also be, you know, final approval before you would go to construction. So this is a far way out. This is where we are right now. And how do you stay connected? How do you become more part of that process? One of the best ways is to go to rossvalleywatershed.org. This project, along with every other project in the program where we will be engaging the public, will have its own webpage. We will be discussing the meetings that we've had. We will be posting videos if videos have been recorded, like this meeting here. We will be also the Q&As, which we have produced Q&As for this project will be posted. And then most importantly, you can subscribe for updates. So you'll be added to a mailing list, and any meeting that will be coming up, you will be notified of. So key points kind of before we start heading off into the Q&A, and you know, Ross Valley floods. You know, detention is necessary to prevent major flooding. Lefty offers a key opportunity for detention, and community engagement and support is essential. So, you know, this isn't our first meeting. We've had even meetings about Lefty over the past couple of years. I was actually, my first meeting in Ross Valley was back in December 15th, and I know it was a huge topic at that meeting. A lot of you were there. You stood up, you presented your, concerns, and, this kind of is a general idea about, what are the concerns that we might have to think of, not specifics, but we want to work with you on the specifics. These are just kind of the general concepts that we want to think of going forward. Construction impacts, inconvenience, loss of field space, safe routes to school, is there a better location, loss of field use, all these things. And I also mentioned the Q&A document. So these are some of the questions that are in the Q&A document. I hope there's still copies back there. Yes, there are. Carrie's nodding her head. Carrie's in the back there. There are copies of the Q&A document. So hopefully these will begin to answer some of the questions you might have. But how would detention at Lefty work? What are some of the health and safety concerns with detention? And how can we address those? How long would the field be closed after a flood, and who would be responsible for cleaning the field? Where would games be held while the existing fields are under construction? Got a bunch more. What's happening now, and what are the next steps with the project? Hopefully I helped answer that one a little bit. Who will make the decisions on what the new field and detention site will look like, and how will it function? When will detention basin designs be ready for public review? How much would the project cost, and how would it be funded? And then finally, how long will construction take, and what would the impacts be? So now I believe we're at the point where we can hear from you, which is why we're here. We can start out with Q&A, and I believe we have another mic that Katie's going to turn on, and we can start by passing it around. And I believe, I think you just, it needs to be green. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, yeah, so questions about the presentation first. I mean, you can go off the presentation. I would love to get as many questions answered as possible. So if you have comment too, maybe you can hold that till later, but no hard and fast rules here. So, Matt. Yeah.
Thanks.
Here, you can be here.
Okay. What I have is actually a series of questions. You'd like me to sit down? All right. And a series of questions I'm just hoping will be addressed in the future, so I'm not looking for a specific answer at this time, but I think they're very important for this project. I'll grab my glasses as I get a little older. They help. Okay, so the questions from tonight's, and I took this from the Corte Madera Public Scoping Meeting. The program states that the EIS and EIR to be prepared. I hope our comments are heard and considered. I do not know how our comments can or will be heard when any and all specifics are absent from the information provided at this time. So they go in a number, but one, are you asking us to provide the specifics for you to consider putting in the EIS and EIR? When will you provide?
Mac, I'm gonna interrupt you.
Yes.
So, so the questions you're asking are about the Army Corps project, and this list of questions is fine, and it's great, and it's long, and it will take a while to read. But you know what I'm going to ask? Because it's not specific really to the sort of broader program we're talking about and/or to Lefty, I want to get the sort of Lefty local questions done first, and then we can go there. And I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I also, you've got it in writing, and that's great. So, yeah, so you can go to Lefty, but if you're going to read them, why don't you pick a couple key questions and then give us that you would like to have answered right now, and then we'll let someone else ask a question.
I'd rather serve the questions.
You've got 17 questions there, and it's not fair to everyone else. So if you have think about what you want to ask.
Thank you, Supervisor Ross. Well, Christopher Lang, Fairfax. Question I'm asking for staff is, do you have in your file the fluvial geomorphology study done for the town of Fairfax? It shows instead of bridge replacement, I think what you're asking about is some of the bridges in Fairfax have concrete bottoms in the creek bed that reduce flow, and some don't. And the study called out the ones that had concrete underneath them in the creek bed that probably should be removed to increase capacity. So do you have access to that study?
Yes, in fact, the person who did that study, Matt Smeltzer,
Yeah.
it was on our team and actually brought that information to bear in preparing the.
You said bridge replacement. I thought that was a misnomer.
No, it's not no, because it's not just the bottom. Sometimes it's the soffit or the bottom of the bridge that also obstructs the flow. So that's what we looked at. And in Fairfax, the CIP plan calls for removal of and replacement of several bridges, in particular the Merwin Street Bridge.
My first comment is actually regarding the process of reaching out to the community. So if Lefty Gomez Field detention basin is built at White Hill Middle School, over 1,000 students and residents' lives will be disrupted for a massive multi-year construction project, and forevermore for time using for flooding, subsequent cleanup and maintenance and rebuilding and replanting. I'm a parent of a child in Ross Valley School District, and on January 20th, I attended the Ross Valley School District facilities meeting in which Superintendent Rick Bagley committed to distribute a notice of tonight's meeting to all district parents. He did not follow through on that promise. As a result, thousands of parents whose children are either attend the White Hill Middle School now or will in the future when they finish grade school are missing from this important conversation. The reputation of Ross Valley School District is at stake now, and I'm afraid it will suffer if the district partners in the stormwater detention basin project on school grounds.
So a couple, you had a couple questions in there, and first, could somebody speak to the, I was going to speak to the, how the, if there is a detention basin and it is, there's a big storm and it's put into action, what would be the protocol around how that might happen, and happens after the storm is over? How long does it take for the water to be let out, and what would the cleanup be? And we may not have all those answers, but let me have someone speak to that process.
Hi, thank you. My name is Raul Rojas. I'm the Director of Public Works for the County Marin. Thank you all again for being here. This is a great turnout. Nice to see everybody. To answer your question, I think what was put up there over the last 65 years, it would be used approximately 3 times, and for about a total time of about 24 hours. So when it fills up, fill up for about 24 hours, and the water will be released, and it wouldn't take more than a few hours for that water to be drained out. Now, what I don't think I can answer right now is, once it's all drained out, we obviously need to go make sure that everything is okay to be used, and we'd go through a process, and we'd have to make sure it's cleaned up and ready to go. In my experience in my past organization, this was a very common thing. In fact, we probably had more than a half a dozen of them throughout the city where I was at. And it generally took a day or two for it to dry out. Once it dried out, it was playable. So it didn't take very long. I think you had some other questions about construction, also constructability.
You also asked about the school district, and so obviously the school district is a key stakeholder in looking at this, and they need to give their consent to move forward as we go to different steps. The community process is going to have to involve the parent body, obviously, of White Hill, as well as the neighbors, as well as the town of Fairfax. So this isn't the last conversation around that, and I think that the concern around safety during an event, while it's being used, I think those are really valid concerns, and it's going to be really important if we are to move forward that there's a really clear protocol about when the detention basin is used, how are kids kept safe, what's the, just like we have earthquake drills, and we used to have earthquake drills, and that sort of thing, there's going to have to be a protocol. It's not a given that you just fill up you let the basin fill up with water, and you wouldn't have put in some sort of safeguards to keep kids safe. We're not going to want to create a danger in order to eliminate the risk of flood. That's not the goal. The goal is to keep everyone safe, to reduce flooding and not create something that's going to potentially be of harm to kids. And the school district and the school families need to be involved in that conversation, and there's plenty of time for that to happen. I can go to Bruce.
Thank you, Katie. Bruce Baum. I go back to the '82 flood in Fairfax, and my question is, downtown Fairfax flooded from the Cascades or Elliott Reserve and Deer Park. How will this improve flooding in downtown Fairfax, since the waters have been coming from a different reach, I guess is the right terminology?
According to, first of all, the '82 flood was even larger than the 2005 flood. The '82 flood was on the order of maybe 150 to 200 year event. So it was an extraordinary event. Our design ceiling was for the 1% annual chance event, or the 100-year event, which conveniently the 2005 flood was. And in 2005, the floodwaters in San Anselmo Creek coming off a cascade were contained in the channel. It's Fairfax Creek, coming from this area, that actually overtopped its banks as it got towards downtown. So this project would address that flooding. These detention basins would address that flooding. They're located, some of those on the map that I showed you, are located along Fairfax Creek or its tributaries, and they would reduce that flow.
So thank you. We're not sure about that. Thank you. So if I understand you correctly, the 2005 flood did not flood Fairfax, and it was not created from...
No, that's not what I said.
Well, please clarify how this will help from the Cascades and the Deer Park Creek reaches from flooding downtown Fairfax. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Fairfax in 2005, downtown Fairfax flooded from Fairfax Creek. As far as addressing flooding that can occur from the Deer Park, San Anselmo Creek, one of the locations of the detention basin alternatives that I showed is in Deer Park. So that would address flooding in Deer Park area and San Anselmo Creek.
Not Cascades, though.
Not Cascades, no. We don't have any alternatives up there. There's a nature preserve up there.
My name is Megan Potter, and it sounded like from what this woman over here was saying that it's 16 feet that the field would go down from where it is right now if this were to happen. Is that correct? Is that your plan?
Russ, is that correct?
Up to 16 feet, and then the question is...
No, that really hasn't been set in stone yet. When James was working on that original study, he started at that point, and that really was the engineering feasibility side of it. But there still is the social feasibility that we're here to discuss.
So then for 2 years while it was being constructed, there would be no field, it seems like. Is that true?
Speak to the construction, what's projected.
It depends on the final design of the project on how long the construction would be, and it probably would be a year to 2 years. Right. But prior to that time, we would have some discussions and come up with a plan for alternate fields that could be used during that time. And we've been talking with the school district already about how we might be able to formulate a plan for that.
So my question is, I'm curious what the slope would be from the height of the berm, I'm over here, down to the lowest point, just what the slope is. My second question is, what was the cost to the towns of Fairfax and San Anselmo for the 2005 flood and for the 1982 flood, if anybody knows? And the third is an observation that we are on the second story of a building discussing flooding. How convenient and fortunate for us. Not up here, though.
Yeah. You know, again, the slope of the side embankments, when it was designed in the CIP and then later studied with the geotechnical soils, it was laid out at 3-to-1. And that's basically to, you know, a nice stable slope. But again, with discussion, that can vary and change.
And anybody got costs for what it costs the towns?
The estimate is roughly $100 million, and that's pretty much the Ross Valley floodplain. And that included private property and public property, and frankly, in San Anselmo and Fairfax and Ross, that was the town halls and fire stations. So there was a lot of, yeah. And that was I don't know about 82. Okay, who was next? Oh, sorry.
I'm John Proctor, and I'm a neighbor, actually directly across the street here. And I have a process question or request, or I'd like to put it stronger than that, but I don't like being brought into these things the way that they have been in the past. I'm willing to get together with the neighbors in this area and work with you to try to address the concerns which we have to come up with a system that will really work. But coming to a meeting, once every 6 months or a year just doesn't do it as far as having a real process that we actually can influence what's going on and come up with good solutions.
Yeah, I appreciate all those comments, and they're right on, and that's one of the things that I think that we have seen very, very clearly, that we've dropped the ball on process, and so going forward it has to be better and it has to be more inclusive, and frankly I would appreciate ideas on how this near-term community process, as we decide over the next several months and maybe a little bit more, if indeed we want to go forward or not, what that might be, and I would appreciate your input directly. But I think it's a combination of public meetings like this that are a little bit more formal, and presentations. I think it's probably maybe some stakeholder groups and getting representatives from the stakeholder groups to sit down and do some working, and maybe even some on-site meetings to be able to actually be at Lefty Gomez and looking at and talking about what it might look like, what it could be, all sorts of things. So not a defined process, but definitely it has to be a really stepped up process. So thank you for that criticism, and it's heard.
Thank you. I'm opposed to a stormwater detention basin at White Hills School, Lefty Gomez Field, and Community Park. Stormwater basins pose inherent risks, including drowning and exposure to hazardous debris. This isn't about me being alarmist. According to experts, including the American Society of Civil Engineers, there are a number of basin risk factors related to proximity to neighborhoods, parks, and schools. In the Ross Valley Flood Board's flow reduction study criteria on page 121 under section D, gain public acceptance, the Lefty Gomez Basin site received a low score for public safety for operation near school/park. Under potential to trap people, the Lefty Basin site says no, but scored 4 out of 6 or medium. That seems equivocal and is concerning. In 2005, a detention basin in Hawaii had a blocked drain and was flooded virtually overnight to form a lake about half a football field long. Charlotte Schaefer's was a 5-year-old neighborhood girl who jumped in to save a friend who had fallen in. She drowned while family and neighbors frantically searched for her in only 3 to 4 feet of stormwater. There's a link to an article about Charlotte with a photograph of the gently sloping grassy basin she died in at SaveLeftyGomez.com. As a mother, I can imagine something like that happening. Even if the basin were fenced, a body of water on a campus would be a novelty item. Kids are naturally curious and they lack mature judgment. Could the detention basin drain ever become blocked with debris from the runoff from the sloped basin walls? And given climate change, is there any way of knowing how rapidly basin stormwater could rise in a flash flood, or how often it would be used for floodwater detention? After stormwater detention periods, I wonder how many inches or feet of silt and sediment are anticipated to settle or deposit from the runoff? How would you deal with any hazardous stormwater debris concentrated on the floor following flooding?
Did you want to respond?
Yeah. I'll respond. I think it might take multiple people to respond, hopefully to address all of your concerns. And I appreciate the emotion you bring into the meeting tonight, because these are serious risks, and that's why we have to be responsible in coming up with a good solution for those risks that we all can stand behind. And not to diminish the risk that might be present with a detention basin, but I think the community also has to acknowledge the risk of not detaining floodwaters or not finding a solution to the flooding. Flooding in itself, raging creek waters through our towns and through the communities that we have here, that is a risk as well. And I think it's an honest discussion to be able to weigh those two risks against one another. And the other thing is the reports that are mentioned in the ranking criteria. Again, those were all looked at from an engineering perspective. So if Lefty had ranked low for safety, what that really translates into is it means that compared to some of the other sites, we will have to do more here at Lefty than we might at another site. That comes at greater cost probably. That might make it maybe not as desirable from that cost perspective, but there's such a strong benefit potentially at this site to help us solve the flooding problem that's worthwhile. That challenge to design this against even those risks is all the more worthwhile.
Thank you. Thanks for that. My name is John Ferguson. I live down the block and I have kids in the school district. Just based on, it's great when everyone turns and looks at you. Hi, guys. I just want to follow that thought up that you had about that this is a site that has its issues and you may not be able to make it happen. Have you started to think about what your alternative plans would be should, for whatever reason, this site not be able to be developed in this way, given the needs of the flood district?
Yes. So there have been other sites that have been identified. They don't have all the same benefits as Lefty. Again, some of our criteria, if I want to go back here, bear with me here. This is really kind of why we are excited about Lefty Gomez Field, and I think why it's important for us everyone to consider it. Give it a chance, give us a chance to try to build this into the project that we think it could be to really help solve this issue. So we've shown, James has shown, it's effective. It achieves 75% of the target flow reduction for Fairfax Creek. So that's a huge piece of that puzzle. It's not all of it. We still have other things we have to do, but it's a very large piece. It's multi-benefit. So it's going to reduce flood risk. It's going to improve recreation. Creek habitat opportunities for improvements, those exist. Stormwater quality improvements, those exist. And then finally, it's achievable to us. One of the ranking criteria that Suzuki mentioned along with the safety where there were things that we would have to address were the other very positive things like it's on publicly owned land and there's also the potential for grant funding. So the publicly owned land is a huge thing. We already have a partner, a willing partner in the school district to look into this further and to work together. As many of you know, partnerships are sometimes the hardest aspect of any project. So when you can already say you have a willing partner on the table to work with you on something, that is a huge benefit right there.
What about alternatives?
For alternatives, I don't know if James, from the technical aspects.
Flip back a few. Yeah, that's it. There are other alternative basins that will be evaluated, several. So they're all going to be evaluated on the same playing field as the project moves forward.
Does that include Drake High School that has a plastic field, non-porous?
No. No, the ones that are being considered are shown here. Can you point to those?
Yeah.
We have Lefty Gomez, Loma Alta, the nursery that's just up the road here, Camp Bothine. Those are all alternative sites that can be used to meet our flow reduction target in Fairfax.
Can you just give a little bit more on the status of Loma Alta, which we have done a little bit of work on in terms of research, and then also where we are with Sunnyside?
Yes, Loma Alta was identified in the 2011 CIP study that James prepared. And so it has had the engineering feasibility looked at from a program perspective, and it does provide benefit and detention up in this area, especially for downtown Fairfax. Now, we haven't gone beyond that yet. We really have not done any kind of geotechnical exploration, nor a lot of other studies. We've had some presentations at some of the homeowner associations around here where we have described it. Frankly, there is a little bit of a hierarchy in these sites here where we have some that have more benefit than others, and Lefty is in the group that has more benefit, and Loma Alta is in the group that has less benefit. So it's kind of a backup site, I think, in our mind. The nursery site is different in that it's privately owned, and we're in discussions with the owners about the possibility of the concept of a detention basin there, and we would want that to be a multi-benefit site also. Well, we're open to public input on that. You know, we've had thoughts. It's adjacent to the open space there, and so we've had some discussions with our parks and open space people about how they might be able to use it if we were to acquire it. And I know that there are trails that go kind of around and through that as the kids go from the neighborhoods to the schools. Maybe we can provide a little nicer access for the kids to school possibly. But all of those are just kind of ideas at this point. We really can't do anything until we get a little further down in our discussions with the property owners.
Do you think you'll ever benefit you see for recreational sports through using the Lefty as a detention center?
Well, our intent is to put everything back that's there, and so of course it will all be brand new, and to improve the facilities besides just being brand new. We'd want to put in some subsurface drainage under the field that would carry the water that rains, just normal rainfall, away quicker that happens now, and it'd be regraded so that it's smoother, and it would bounce back from rainstorms a lot quicker for use. That's one of the things that we would do.
I'm Sheila, and I also live across the street from here, and we just enjoyed the building of this lovely new building and the building across right next to us. So you might think I would look forward to this. I have a question about how, you haven't mentioned cost at all, or even an estimate of cost, and I know it's in some of the reports, but I think it's worth saying. And I work in the medical field, and anything that's 1% is like really, really low. And so we're planning for something. I have the luxury of living upstream, and I understand that. But planning for something that's 1% without knowing the cost is a little distressing. And the last thing I have to say is that, is anyone from the school district here? Because this school also flooded in the floods that you talked about, and is flooded at other times when the creek overflows here. And so what's going to be done to protect the school from flooding with Lefty being downstream from the school? And have you considered the fields that are up here? Thank you.
Russ.
We do have some cost estimates in the information, in the question and answer, and in previous reports. And we're continually looking at that and trying to update those costs, and having, you know, we're looking at it and consultants are peer reviewing that. So stay tuned. We're going to update that as soon as we're finished with that process. And the other question dealt with flooding of the school, and part of the improvements, of course, is the drainage ditch that kind of happens along Glen Drive, as well as potentially Loma Alta. Now, if Loma Alta is placed there, that would give us some control of the water that comes through the school. So.
And I think just the part of what the school is going to need to be, or the school district is going to need to be thinking about, is what are its concerns? What are the questions that it needs answered? What are its must-haves or must-have-nots? And that's has to be part of the conversation as well. And they know that. I think there was a facilities meeting that was referenced before, and there's going to be a meeting coming up at the school district where maybe some part of that discussion starts to happen. So definitely, as a stakeholder and as a property that will be impacted, they're going to have concerns and questions that will need to be addressed. Right here.
I'd just like to make one comment from the floor that might be different than what others say. I work all over the world in drainage and flooding problems. This may not be your child that would die if we don't use Lefty Gomez or whatever else is found. But the reason that we get concerned about flooding is because people die in floods. It is because lives are destroyed in floods. Otherwise, we wouldn't care about the flooding. It's exactly because the public infrastructure is destroyed or a police station has to move for years until it gets fixed, like happened in the last flood in San Anselmo. So I think that people need to consider, I mean, if it weren't for a risk to public life and safety, we wouldn't be going through this exercise, which has been going on for a really long time.
Hi, my name is Kevin Haroff. I live down in Larkspur, Greenbrae. And I just want to make a quick observation about cost. One of the things I think it is going to be important, given the fact that part of the proposal here is to create new recreational facilities, to make sure that in the description to the public of what the costs of the project are, is to break down what is actually being required for flood control as opposed to what's being required to improve recreational facilities. So that's just an observation. The further comment, and actually the main comment that I had, actually goes back to Michael's introductory question about a little bit of confusion about the process that the county has taken with this program for environmental review in compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act. I was at the Unit 4 meeting in Ross last week, and there's an awful lot of confusion about what the environmental review process under CEQA would be for that and for the program overall. Full compliance with CEQA is absolutely critical for every aspect of this program for a variety of different reasons, not the least of which is it provides the best mechanism for identifying and evaluating reasonable and feasible project alternatives. And I think it's important for the county in this program, in every aspect of this program, not just for Lefty Gomez, to commit to a robust project-specific environmental review process under CEQA. So I guess my question is for Lefty Gomez in particular, since I'm not quite sure what you all have in mind for purposes of CEQA compliance, will the county commit, or will there be a commitment to a full environmental impact report with a full and robust consideration of all environmental impacts that are associated with the project, and even more importantly, with a full and robust evaluation of reasonable and feasible project alternatives? Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
One over here.
Who's going to answer? Well, I'll do the shorthand answer there. Yes, of course. Somebody right here. Oh. Sorry.
I'm confused about two things. One is it clear, it's not clear to me whether you all are planning on one basin or more than one basin? In other words, is this proposal for Lefty Gomez only one of a number and we'll get them seriatim? Second thing I'm confused about, I hear two conflicting things from you. One is we don't want to go forward with something that doesn't have community support. I hear a lot of community dubious response. I hear that the excitement that came through y'all's voices was that this was public property and therefore grants were available. But that doesn't seem to me to have as much significance as public approval. So, if this is only the only basin that you're considering, there's not going to be a bunch of them. And there's another one upstream that's private and wouldn't disrupt children's playing fields. And you'd have to spend money on it. But my confusion is about what are your priorities? Are the priorities we can get a grant or we can get public approval? Because they're in conflict. And I can tell you from the last 2 years' experience trying to get grant money through the town of Fairfax to repair some roads that are deteriorating and caving in, and some bridges down the creek deteriorating. It's not easy.
Thank you. I could answer some of your questions. Concerning whether or not this is the only detention basin, sorry, I guess my mic isn't working so well. Concerning whether or not this is the only detention basin, it is not. There are others, as you've identified. The garden site just up the road is another, and we're pursuing on those angles as well. So, you know, it's a combination of sites that would help us reach that flood risk reduction goal, that 100, you know, we're trying to prevent that 2005 flood from reoccurring. So this is a 75% of that piece could be at Lefty, but we realize that we would still need other sites. So we're pursuing those, we're moving forward. And then as far as the grant opportunity, that is something that, you know, we've already made progress with Memorial, the other detention basin, which is no longer on the table. So we are going to be seeing if there are opportunities for that grant to be applied to other basin projects and other flood control projects in general. So that process is going to be happening as well. So that's the priority. Well, the priority is flood protection, and these are just different ways of getting that flood protection. We are really pursuing, like I said, many different avenues concurrently, and this is one of them.
And Martha, I would just add that it's obviously you have to, if the community agrees that they want to do something about reducing flood risk and addressing this flooding problem, if they agree that they want to do that, the next step is agreeing on what solutions we can get behind. And it has to be a solution we agree on in concept and also one that we can get funding for, or we have to wait for the funding for it. But we also do have the storm drainage fee, which we've been collecting. So we do have some of our own local funding in place. And if you have community support and you have a well-developed project, you're well positioned to get a grant. But bottom line, it has to be a project that not only has funding, but also that has community support.
Thank you. My name's Ralph Lewin. I live just across the street here on Glen Drive. And I'm out here on Lefty Field quite often with my two boys playing soccer and baseball. So at a time when we need more soccer and baseball fields, why would we shrink Lefty Gomez by 25%? Only one soccer game or baseball game could be played at one time. And it just seems like we need more fields, not less. And so moving in that direction doesn't make sense to me. Also, the basin, as I think Megan pointed out, right now the plans are 16 feet deep, and you say, oh, they may not be 16 feet deep, but those are the plans we have. You know, that's 2 stories deep. What are you going to do with all the dirt?
What's the heat going to be in like for the kids when they're down there? There's no cross breeze when it's 16 feet deep. So it just, I don't know, it doesn't seem like a good plan. Also, you know, one of the reasons I moved to Fairfax was those bumper stickers, only in Fairfax, right? You know, putting up a 15-foot concrete wall where a creek flows doesn't seem like an only in Fairfax solution to me. And finally, a number of people have said to me that there's talk of putting an artificial turf field behind White Hill. And I'm just curious where that's at, and if that's connected with Lefty Gomez, is, you know, some kind of way to make more field space for the kids, and where the money would come from for that.
So just wanted to point out again, this is a great first step that we have, this visualization tool, based on the level of understanding we have of the project right now. But again, a lot of that was based on just the focus of engineering and the focus of detaining the water. We realize that that can't be the only focus for this project. So thank you for the input concerning your concerns with visual impacts and impacts to people on the field. What I wanted to point out is that this is a tool that I think we can use moving forward. So this is based on a particular design, but as we refine those designs based on your input, we want to use this so you can visually see how things have changed, and we'll be investigating that. You know, maybe there's even better visualizations that this we can use to really give you that feeling for how it looks. You had another question concerning, I think,
the field or off hall, and if there's a new field up here.
Yes, and so that is another thing that we would be pursuing as part of the project, and would likely have to pursue even prior to starting construction, so that there wouldn't be that disruption or interruption that you're talking about.
There's nothing in place. There's no funding. That's just kind of an idea.
It would have to be linked to the project. You know, if the community says we can't support this project if it results in field loss, which is likely going to be the same conclusion that the school district has, then of course it has to be part of the project if that public support is going to be gained and it's going to move forward.
Katie, may I please ask a couple questions?
I'm going to go here and then there and then to you. Okay.
So you're trying to protect Fairfax, and I hear there's a few other sites around. So can you talk a little bit about, you know, what happens if Lefty doesn't go forward, how the other sites might protect Fairfax, and if Lefty does go forward, it's a big reduction from this creek, but what about the creek on the other side? Is there a total plan to protect Fairfax?
I think I'm going to have to defer to Russ. Do you feel comfortable answering this, or James?
Let's look at. Wait.
You're on. You're on.
It's on.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Where are we here? Let's look at this map. Here we go. Yes, there's Lefty Gomez Field that is along Fairfax Creek, but there's also these other alternative sites that can also provide protection for Fairfax.
Just as much as Lefty?
Yeah, potentially as much as Lefty. It just depends on how they're designed, yes.
So why is the emphasis on Lefty first? Why pick this versus the other?
Well, they're all at the same stage, really. It's just we're excited about Lefty, but actually as the project moves forward, they're all going to go through the same evaluation process at the same time.
You try to build them all?
No, we're not going to try to build them all, but the process of screening and making the selection will all occur concurrently, all of them.
Well, I'm sure some people must, I'm not against Lefty or
Yeah.
for, I'm just listening, but I'm hearing that it's on a school property, it's disruptive. If there's another site that's just as good.
Give him the microphone back.
I'm sorry. I'm not against Lefty, I'm not for Lefty, I'm just here listening, asking questions. If this site creates problems for people because it's a school, it's in the area, et cetera, why wouldn't you first pick a site that isn't as potentially disruptive to the community? Pick something else that achieves the same reduction.
I think, thank you for the question. That's a really valid question. And as you can see up in the map, we have several locations. The nursery site has a private owners, and they haven't jumped up and said, I'm willing to sell. We're talking to them, and we're going through the process. Altaloma is a good location. However, we could have some environmental issues when we go for that one because it's close to open space. So it's not, they're all possibilities, but the one that would have the most impact and has the most dual use and all the programs that Neil went through was Lefty. We have a private owner that may or may not want to sell. We have an issue that we could get around, we don't know, but it's next to an open space, so it has a little more environmental issues for us. Not that Lefty doesn't, but it has more. And so there's a process. Yes, we have all of them, but Lefty right now would be the one that would be our first priority. That doesn't mean it's the only priority, it's near the top because of all the issues that were explained earlier. But so we do have the other ones, we are working toward them, but they have more issues associated with them. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
So I have a comment that is directly related to this, according to the November 2015 Ross Valley Flood Reduction Study Report, Lefty Gomez Field was not identified as the highest ranked location nor the most effective for the flood detention basin. In fact, both Deer Park and former Sunnyside Nursery Basin were ranked higher. Lefty Gomez Field scored medium-low in public safety. So here are a few facts for comparison about the proposed Sunnyside former nursery detention basin. It can hold the same amount of water as Lefty Gomez if Lefty is built 16 feet deep. It covers the same drainage area of the watershed. It will not disturb the community or school. It will not shrink or sink our park or playground. It will not require immediate cleanup. It will not alienate the community. It will have broad public support. It will not deteriorate the reputation of Ross Valley School District. There is an upfront expense to acquire the land, but it would be the best spent money in the capital improvement plan. What we know about the Lefty Gomez, of course, this is based on the initial plan. The detention basin would be created by lowering the field 16 feet and constructing an 8 feet high earthen berm along the east side. A 17 feet high concrete dam and spillway would be placed across the bed of Fairfax Creek. Now, I would like to go back to your presentation and the Windsor Park. I would like to know first, what's the depth of this field? I know that the Windsor field is 16 acre feet, so it's about 3 times as large as Lefty. So it can allow for nice, mild slopes and large storage capacity. Now, if you, let's say that, okay, we're not going to build Lefty 16 feet deep, but 9 feet deep, your entire modeling is thrown upside down because the potential of the Lefty is based on the 16 feet deep hole. Now, you can't, if you want to achieve the storage capacity of 88 acre feet, cubic feet, you have to go 16 feet down or up. You cannot stretch the field. So if you, let's say that, okay, based on the community concerns, we are going to build it 9 feet deep. Instead of 88, you have 44, which makes it very small detention basin.
No, that's a good comment. And, you know, it's true, we don't know yet what the final design would be for Lefty and how it might interplay with the other detention basins. All we're saying at this point is we're trying to get your feedback and continue this discussion so that we can propose a project that makes sense both technically, that helps reach our flood risk reduction goals, as well as gives the Lefty, you know, the recreational benefit that, you know, it needs. That's, I mean, really what it is right now. The reports that you're mentioning are available. You know, you've obviously reviewed them, and it's good to review them, but I think there's a danger of getting stuck on that as this is the plan and this is what we're doing. That's just the start for us to understand the technical feasibility of that project. We're trying to move on to the other phase of incorporating the feedback. So it will change. It's not going to be that way.
So how deep is the Windsor?
Russ, do you know how deep Windsor is? About 5 feet.
Well, okay. Thank you.
If I may? Okay, because some of my questions certainly follow this gentleman's questions. So you've come up here and given us a very specific figure of 75% of the flow that's going down that creek. Therefore, you have a specific volume that you've included for these calculations. You have a floor at 16 feet, but it's not told to us or relevant if it is not provided relevant to the creek. So my question is, what is the floor relative to the creek? And then, since I assume it'd be a negative amount, how will you lift the water to the creek so it can exit properly?
It's not lower to the creek.
Yeah, if you could explain how that works.
Yeah, the floor of the basin would never be lowered to the creek. We always have to have the floor of the basin higher than the creek so it will drain.
But right now we can see where the field is, we can see the relative creek, so how can we go down 16 feet and assume it's going to drain?
The elevation topographic information, it's been surveyed. We've surveyed the ground surface on Lefty Gomez Field. We've surveyed the bed of the creek. And going down the depth that we've preliminarily planned, the maximum depth that would be such that nowhere on the field would it be lower than the bed of the creek.
That's what really set the depth.
Yeah, that's our limiting factor,
Yeah.
really. You absolutely could get more volume, more effective if we could go deeper, but we don't want to go deeper. I mean, that's the maximum depth that we'd want to go.
And is that information provided somewhere in the reports we can actually see those?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. It's in the CIP report. There is actually one of the first generations of the Lefty Gomez design is there, and there are topographic lines in the report.
Okay, so it's 8:30, and I have 2 questions here, and then I'm just going to take one more, and then we'll stay. But I just kind of want to give, if people are ready to leave, I want to give them an opportunity to do so. Maybe you're not ready to leave, and that's okay too. So we can keep doing questions, but it is 8:30. Here you go.
Brigitte Wick, I'm actually a neighbor. I live across Whitehall Middle School. First of all, I welcome all these concerns about why the push for Lefty Gomez is so strong. As a neighbor, I have some serious safety concerns in case of a malfunction of the detention basin. If there's any overtopping, could there be flooding to the school? We heard that, but could there be flooding to the neighborhood? If that happens, who takes care of the damages, of the cost? Who is liable? I would like to know that as a neighbor. I'm also very concerned about the environmental impact and about degrading the neighborhood along Glen Drive. What kind of structures would be built? Dams, spillways, culverts, any concrete walls? What does that Stillen Basin look like? What kind of materials are you using? Also, would that Stillen Basin be accessible to humans and wildlife? Would it be fenced in? What would that look like? And what would happen to the whole animal habitat along the creek, and so on. So I just to really try to roll it off so that you hear kind of the gamut of the concerns.
Obviously, those are a lot of questions. Is there any way that you could send those or submit those to us? Because I don't think we have the knowledge at this point to answer every single one of those. There's a lot of questions that would come in the future. We were taping it. I was reminded. We'll review the tape, and I'll write it down.
You could, those were a lot of questions, but you could comment at least on the first one, because that's a very general liability concern. So in case of a malfunction of that basin, what happens to the damage that could happen to the houses, to the school, and so on? Who is liable?
Yeah, that's a very good question. First of all, let me say that this project, the county is obviously going to do everything it can during the design phase, if the project gets there, to address those safety concerns. But there's also a layer of regulatory review and approval, and that's called the State Department of Water Resources Division of Safety of Dams. They have to approve this project. So they're going to look at all of those things to make sure that there's a fail-safe mechanism if anything ever goes wrong. One of the key features of the project is a spillway. All dams have spillways. They have to have spillways. Spillways are designed such that the water surface could only get to a certain maximum level. If it does, it goes over the spillway, and the size of the spillway is designed such that it can accommodate what's called the largest practical maximum flood event. It's called the PMF, which is like the Noah's Ark of floods. The water level in the basin would never get to a certain level that would be kept low enough that it wouldn't have any impact on property or life.
But there's no liability with the state of the county, it would be individual homeowners.
I don't know about liability.
All right, would you please go back to the slide that was the watershed, and it went basically from the bay all the way up, and it shows the overtoppings of the creeks?
Yeah. That's it, right there.
Thank you. Okay, so the first thing I would like to say is, looking at this map, we need a comprehensive plan for the entire watershed. I think we all agree on that. Instead, we're getting piecemeal projects for which the environmental costs are too high, and that's why Memorial Park is off the table. If you look at flood walls and berm pictures, there are no trees, none. I would like you to look at this map as residents. Look at your area and think about the flooding that has occurred in your area when you were there. Take that institutional memory, and when you are interacting with the county, go over this street by street. Is their information the same as what you and your neighbors remember? Is it accurate? I am raising this as a matter of the function. The Corps put in a channel that does not work. They miscalculated because, and here we are going to sediment, and I'm going to ask questions of Mr. Stetson. I forgot, the county. When you're talking to the county, I hope the county is going to make a process so the neighbors can go street by street, and you can verify what they are telling you. Is it true? Is that really what happened in your neighborhood? Sediment. Back to the Corps. Their channel does not function in Unit 3 because their modeling was inaccurate. They used the wrong Manning's N factor when they did their modeling. Stetson has told you they are doing modeling. When you do modeling, you need to know what is the sediment load in the water. How is the water reacting to that sediment? How is it affecting the flow? How can you know that? I'd like an answer. Not now. Let me finish. Let me finish, Katie. Let me finish. It is the question. Okay. So when you're talking about your hydraulic models and your practical maximums, are they accurate? Because if they're not accurate, then why are we doing this exercise? We need to be sure. Yes, I know floods. I went through 82. I was in water up to here. Okay, so, all right. Then we get to the thank you. Then we get to the dual-use dry detention basins. There are many problems with them. One of the big things is the polyaromatic hydrocarbon levels that are in the runoff. We all know storm runoff contains sewage and coliform, and all of this is dropping through a sedimentation process into the soil of the field.
So it's concentrated. It's not just dropping the way it does when it rains. It's concentrating because it's dropping as it's held in the basin. Where your children play, and you have been, in this information that's put out, it says 1 to 3 weeks to restore the flood. And I would say that is probably not likely because the county does not have the money to dredge the existing projects. So is the school going to pay these cleanups? You really need facts, people, and you're not being given facts. The way you get facts is in your small meetings, you say what you know to be the truth to the people making the decisions, and you get answers from them. If they do not give you answers, you cannot make these decisions. You cannot evaluate the benefits and the cost of these projects. Children are not collateral damage. We all know it. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so Garo had several questions in there, and I think, James, you can answer some of them around the sediment and things like that. But I just, I don't question anybody's interest in this program or this project, whether they're for it or against it. I think we're here because we recognize there's a flooding issue. We also recognize that maybe some of the solutions, we could agree on them or we might not agree on them. We have to decide as a community if we want to do something about the flooding and to what degree, what we are willing as a community to tolerate or to embrace or what have you. And it may be that this community can't get behind detention basins, but they are a tool that will make a difference. So that's what this conversation is about. But I don't appreciate, I'm sorry, we're doing, Stetson Engineers is a pretty high profile firm, and they're doing the modeling and have the science, and they're doing the work. So find a question, the data and the analysis and the work that's been done, and then ask for answers. But let's be respectful in this conversation, because I think we're all here for community. All right? Now, James, could you give it a whirl? I know. Just put.
There's a lot of missing facts.
We don't have all. We don't have.
But you're so respected. You have all the experts. We're asking for facts. And you have so few to give.
Sir.
We don't even understand if the Army Corps of Engineers make such a big mistake.
Yeah.
Why are we not pursuing to rectify that mistake?
We are, and that mistake was made 50 years ago, and now hopefully better. So let's let James answer the questions, and then I'm going to wrap up.
Okay. Regarding the modeling, that actually is a very good point. How do we know that our models are accurate? No model is perfect, but they're useful. And we believe that the models that we've developed are accurate. How do we know that? Because when we develop these models, we do a process called calibration. We run the models and we see if they can replicate what we actually observe in the field in terms of creek flow and velocity. And our models have been calibrated. And once they're calibrated, we run them again under another scenario through a process called verification and see again if they will verify and replicate the results of another flood that we use as a verification scenario. So they go through that process. Our modeling was turned over to FEMA, and they reviewed it. And actually, FEMA used our models in their floodplain mapping. So that federal agency has looked over our work.
Okay, we don't have a lot of trust in FEMA. I think that the
Please,
issue
please.
I don't think for all the people living in New Orleans, but I have one very important question. The thing that would give us a lot of peace of mind would be to understand the parameters that you have behind modeling. So we'd like to see those reports because, as we both know, that you can do modeling on anything you want, and you get all the results you want. But if you don't understand the parameters behind them, like for instance the things that Mac brought up. Anyway,
yeah.
We would like to see why it's not possible to do a bigger channel.
Yeah.
For instance.
Okay.
And understand what parameters you use to come up to the conclusion that that was not a feasible solution, and that taking the fields and these other options are superior to that.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. And in the interest of transparency, all of our work has been documented, and it's on the web. You can go in the CIP study. And not only is the CIP report plan on the web, but all of the technical memoranda that support that CIP study are there too. So you can review all that information. It's right out there.
Okay, so I'm actually gonna wrap up here. This is not a last meeting. This is a first meeting. Every questions have come up. All the questions are valid. The concerns are valid. And certainly, you need to have trust. We need to have trust and confidence in the data and the science and the math that's being used. There is no push to get Lefty done. Okay? Lefty has to be a community project. Lefty or anything. We may end up with nothing, but we have to have this conversation and decide what the community is willing to support and get behind. And it's just starting now. And so the criticism is fine, the constructive questions are just fine.
It's the conversation.
And it's the conversation, exactly. So I'm gonna wrap up, and we'll stay, but I just want to tell anyone that wants to leave, if you leave your email, we will keep you in the loop in terms of future meetings of any kind, formal, informal. If putting together either neighborhood meetings or stakeholder group meetings, we'll let you know. This has to be a conversation in which everybody is involved and no voices are shut out, and that's the intention. So we will circle back, and thank you for coming very much and listening and all your questions and concerns. We're listening very, very hard.
Oh, do you want? I'm shocked we're even here because there's a real flooding problem. There's a flooding problem in San Anselmo and Ross and down there, and it's a horrible problem. But the solution really is to transfer flooding from there to another community, which I don't think that that's fair. I don't understand that when there are other alternatives, or if anything, to transfer flooding from one part of the community to another that has negative impacts. That should be the absolute last resort. And I think that, we are in a drought. And we need water. I mean, we have open space. We have the MMWD with a bunch of lakes, and that's where we get all our water. This is maybe a great opportunity to get water off Loma Alta, Deer Park, and retain it up there and use the water to help solve our drought. I just see this as a really quick fix to transfer one problem onto a different community, and it's very narrow-minded. The people who are affected down there, if they're really worried about a 1% event, they have the economic wherewithal to buy that private property or to buy the Marin Town and Country Club, and to just stick it in this community, I think, is a really bad idea.
Thank you.
Everyone's leaving, that's okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Hi.
You want to come up? All right. Thank you, everyone. If you want to stay and just ask us questions up here, I'm going to turn off the mics. Good night.